Hello, this is attorney Mark Lopez. Earlier this week, I had the chance to interview attorney Claire Corrado. Claire is an amazing immigration attorney located here in Indianapolis. She is an attorney that my firm knows, we trust, and we regularly refer cases to. The interview is about how criminal charges can impact a person's immigration status. If you have any questions, give us a call, 317-632-3642. So that is the big question. How does a criminal case affect a person's immigration status? So however you want to talk about that, I would love to hear it, and so would they.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the important thing to keep in mind is that, in general, if you're a U.S. citizen and you have a criminal case, you guys are in charge of making sure they get the lowest sentence, spend less time in jail, pay less money, those sorts of things. And so that's your concern. When you're an immigrant, you're not yet a U.S. citizen, you've got two concerns. You're trying to get off, or you're trying not to have that sentence, but at the same time you need to make sure that you're not affecting your status in the future. So the ways that criminal cases can affect your status would be you might lose your visa, you might be deported, or you might just be prevented from becoming a U.S. citizen in the future. So those are the main ways that we see criminal cases affect immigration status.
And Claire, you mentioned a very important topic. Every time someone's charged with a crime, the goal of the Mark Lopez Law Firm is to find a way out of that. And if we can't find a way out of that, to minimize the charges. And then just from my interactions with you, with clients that we've mutually shared, we've gone forward on cases that perhaps we weren't 100% confident on winning, but because of the immigration situation, we pushed ahead because the ramifications of a conviction were going to be catastrophic.
Yes, and it's funny you say that. I'm like remembering cases in my head. You guys have seriously gotten some people much lower charges that did make a life and death difference to them in their immigration case. That's absolutely true. So sometimes, that's another good point, sometimes for the U.S. citizen, it might make sense to plead to something to try to get yourself a different sort of penalty, but for the immigrant, it's do or die. You're going to lose everything if you plea to anything. So really your best chance is to go forward with trial, and sometimes people are successful with that. We appreciate when you guys can pull that off for our people.
Well, just something that I wasn't really confident about when I first started my practice was how criminal charges affect immigration, and we've had situations where I thought a great resolution to a case, and after talking with Claire, realizing that absolutely is not a good resolution because the immigration status would have a catastrophic response, person being deported. Well, that's not, getting someone a lesser charge, if they're going to get deported doesn't mean too much. So just kind of talking about that, I think in my mind there's at least 3 different areas where immigrants kind of fall. Either that's, case we dealt with together was undocumented immigrants, people here who are legal permanent residents, and then we also have people that are here in a short-term status, or I call them visas. That may not be the correct term, but I would like to talk to you about people who are undocumented. What are some of the challenges they face when dealing with the criminal justice system?
So one of the main concerns when people are undocumented is that they don't have a status to lose, and so they're at the highest risk immigration-wise, because it's not just a matter of if they avoid the conviction or not, but also whether they're going to come to the attention of the ICE agents. So sometimes getting a fast resolution or doing it in a way that makes it less likely they'll have contact with the system is very valuable to them, because even if they get off completely on their charges, they could still be at risk of deportation.
Oh, that's scary. And ICE stands for what? Remind us again.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
And every time someone is arrested and they're not a citizen, it's possible they'll have to deal with ICE. Am I correct?
That's correct, because they sort of keep track of what's going on in the criminal world. It's an easier way for them to do their job just by seeing who comes up and seeing if they have a status or not. There are also some ways that sometimes the police, when someone's arrested, may turn that information over to ICE for them to see whether they want to detain the person or not.
And so am I right that being arrested can put somebody on ICE's radar as opposed to...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And so right now one of the biggest things that we referring out are people who are deferred action childhood arrivals. So how do criminal charges affect the DACA kids? Or not necessarily kids, but anybody.
Yeah, some of them are in their 30s, absolutely.
Yeah.
So DACA is interesting. That's a status that's going to be ending soon for most people in the next couple of years, unless Congress does something else. But the interesting thing about DACA is that it has a different criminal classification under the immigration system than other immigration statuses. So I don't really want to get into the details, which your viewers
Yeah.
probably do not care to become an expert in. But the important thing to know is that there's not one overarching classification. It depends on exactly what status you have currently and what you want to do in your future. So there's no easy answer. To give you an example, for DACA, having a conviction for one DUI disqualifies you completely. But there are plenty of other statuses or cases that we do where that wouldn't be an issue at all. So you just have to know. You just have to know in your case how it would affect you. You can't make those generalizations.
Yeah, I remember the most poignant example I have in my brain is I called you with we had a felony drug case, a plea to a felony drug case where the felony was going to go away, but they plead guilty to a DUI. And I thought I was very happy with this result when I was talking to you, and you're like, no, you can't do that. It needs to be the other way.
I just like to be difficult.
No, you're looking out for your clients, and I
Yeah.
appreciate, that's why we trust and respect you and your advice and guidance, because things that might make sense if you are a citizen don't necessarily make sense if you're not a citizen, and that's why it's so important, if you're not a citizen, to have attorneys that spend a lot of time in the particular area of law, such as criminal defense and immigration. So, tell us a little bit about how criminal conviction could affect someone with a legal permanent resident status.
Sure. So one of the most common misconceptions I see is that people think that once they have a green card, they can't be deported, that that's only for undocumented individuals, but that's not true. So I do see at least a few cases a year where people have had green cards maybe 20, 30 years, and they just felt so secure in that status they never bothered to become a citizen, and they've gotten in trouble for something or been in the wrong place at the wrong time or have dumb friends who got them, pulled into something, and then they're at risk of deportation or they're actually deported. And so that can happen to a green card holder. And they can also be, in some cases, maybe not actually deported, but they would be prevented from becoming a U.S. citizen or have to wait longer to become a U.S. citizen.
Without getting into specifics, which we're not trying to teach anything, we're trying to inform, but if you're convicted of a crime and you're not going to be deported as a legal permanent resident, how does that affect the ability to apply for citizenship? You have to wait longer? Is it so many years, or?
Yeah, so there are, one of the requirements to become a U.S. citizen is that you have what's called good moral character. And that's a specific standard in immigration. It's not like, oh, I think I have good moral character. There are really specific rules about that. And so there are some things that someone can do, and it means for a lifetime they can never have good moral character. And there are other things, and you can imagine, kill somebody, that kind of stuff. But some things that are less could definitely be included. And then there are other things that only ruin your good moral character for a certain amount of years. So depending on the type of citizenship application, it would either be a 3-year period or a 5-year period. So there are lots of things that once they fall off of that time frame, you've got 5 years clean, then at that point you can go ahead and naturalize. The problem is that there are a lot of things people want to do when they become a citizen. They might want to apply for a family member. Maybe they have a spouse that needs an application, or and they can only do it as a U.S. citizen. So in a case like that, waiting for an extra 5 years would be a really serious problem.
What are some of for legal permanent residents, what are some of the specific crimes? I'm not asking for an exhaustive list, but like specific crimes you gotta watch out for that could set them back 3, 5, or even a lifetime.
So, that varies a little bit over time. So in our local office here in Indianapolis, immigration's federal, so theoretically the same rules apply everywhere, but there's some amount, there's some amount of what they call discretion. So some offices might apply it more strictly than others. So in our office, historically, if you have like one DUI, in the 5-year period, you'll probably still be able to naturalize. But there are other offices, like in St. Louis is one of the offices I'm familiar with, where they don't care, that's enough that, they don't want to see you until you're totally 5 years out. So it really varies a lot, and sometimes you can overcome it a little bit by showing other factors of why you did this, but you're still a good person, so maybe they should still consider it good moral character.
One of the other topics I want to ask you about are statuses, what are people with visas?
Mm-hmm.
And so this office deals with a lot of student visas, and we also have a few work visas for architects, engineers. What are some of the things they need to watch out for?
Sure. Well, a lot of people, on what you said, you call them visas, they're non-immigrant visas. It means you don't have a permanent stay, you don't have a green card yet. You're here for a specific purpose. So they're only allowed to study, or they're only allowed to work at a certain job that's been cleared, something like that. So their concerns a lot of times have to do with if they're going to be able to renew that visa, if they're going to be able to move into a more permanent status. So say they're a student, but they're going to marry an American, or maybe they're going to get some sort of work visa, and if their employer can get them residence, they want to know if that's going to prevent that. And then also if traveling is going to become a problem for them, or if they might get stuck and unable to come back, especially if they have a visa type that requires them to go back home to renew it, that can be really problematic in some cases.
And so even though crime or criminal charges are at the local or state level, if somebody leaves and they're trying to come back in, the federal government controls whether they can come back in.
Absolutely, yes, they do. And they have from a legal standpoint, when you're at the border, you have very diminished rights. And that's true in a criminal standpoint and also just from an immigration standpoint. So pretty much if you have a non-immigrant visa and they don't want to let you in, they can pretty much not do that. And so when people are on U.S. soil, we have a little bit more ability to fight for them, and it's very risky to travel if we're not sure if we can get you back in or not.
And so one of the things you talked about was people who have visas and trying to turn that into a longer stay, basically. I don't know ins and outs of visa. I don't know who has to go back to their home country or whatnot, but criminal charges generally don't help the ability to continue that visa.
Right. I mean, in general, I guess my advice would be don't be involved in criminal activity, right? But stuff happens, and we understand that, and we're both in the business of trying to help people overcome their mistakes, and nobody's perfect, so that's what we want to work on. But as far as people traveling, a lot of times we see it on the student visas that they're coming in and out to do that, or maybe they're switching schools, and in some cases that sort of thing can require the traveling, or they just miss their mom. I mean.
Well, it's really easy to say, I know you say this joking, we both laugh a little bit, don't commit crimes, but crimes in the United States, particularly Indiana, they're becoming less and less, removing the element of intentional, like I intentionally hit somebody, that's a battery, you meant to do that. We're slowly shifting away from that, and we're heading into an area of almost strict liability. I drove a car above the legal limit, well, I only had 2 beers, well, you should have ate more, so you're guilty, you're accused of a crime, not because something you intentionally wanted to drive drunk, or you intentionally did something. It's just basically, we're going to strict liability, so where both of us laugh a little bit, hey, don't commit crimes, and that's a great advice, no doubt about that. That's not always, it's not easier said than done, and we both recognize that. There's a lot of gray area, especially in criminal law, which is going closer and closer to strict liability, which was never envisioned when they started doing criminal laws and they started threatening jail time. They never said that you could just go to jail and you didn't intend to do something bad.
That's actually happening in immigration too, by the way. We're seeing, not so much in the strict liability sense, but just that any place where previously the government has said, we're going to be pretty reasonable about this, we're going to use our discretion in a way that makes sense, and maybe not deport everyone we could, say a single mother of 5 kids, no need to continue on that process. And what we're seeing under the current administration is that they're using all of their discretion in the worst possible way for immigrants. So it's really, it's been tough, and it's hard to see because a lot of times I think a reasonable person would say, hey, in this case, it's, we probably don't have to use the full extent of the law. But sometimes that happens, so.
Oh, it's disheartening too, especially if people have been here for a long time, have families here. Does it go without saying, beating your case is preferable to pleading guilty in an immigration standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course. If I could pick 2, of course, yeah, beat everyone. But in some cases, or in a lot of cases, maybe, if we know that there's something that, and I know you guys do a lot of negotiating pleas to avoid certain things. So sometimes you've got multiple charges on the table, and there's one that we clearly know won't cause immigration problems, and there's one that might. And so a lot of times it makes more sense to say, hey, we'll take this one that's not going to be an immigration problem. You guys can negotiate that plea, and then, we know that way that we're beating the one we really need to beat. And so sometimes that makes sense just from a risk standpoint. But of course, in a perfect world, yeah, beat them all.
So yeah, I would say obviously the best idea is to beat the criminal case, but like
Absolutely.
Clara said, if you know you can avoid being deported, obviously go for the charge that will result in that. Which, picking and choosing your charges is not necessarily the easiest thing when you're dealing with the state of Indiana. One of the benefits having experienced trial attorneys working for you is that, number one, we go to trial all the time. And so what does that translate, even though you may not need a trial? Because this law firm does go to trial quite often, we're able
They
to
do.
negotiate better pleas than people that continuously just do guilty pleas. And I kid you not, there are attorneys driving BMWs and Lexuses that all they do is plead people guilty. Hey, that's awesome for them. And maybe we're doing it wrong. But this law firm loves trials. And I want to let anybody watching this, we will do whatever we have to do to get you the best possible resolution. We can't promise anything. But we can promise to go down fighting. And we will do whatever we have to do. If you're not a citizen, please don't make the mistake of thinking that a criminal charge isn't a big deal, or my friend had this happen to him, it's not a big deal. Every single case is different. And like Attorney Corrado just said, the current administration is using discretion in ways that they've not seen in the past, and they're using it to the detriment of people who are not citizens. Every criminal case is important. If you are not a citizen, it's even more important. Please don't take being in this country for granted. Do everything you can to maintain your ability to stay in this country. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to plug a little bit for you
Absolutely.
guys here. We send you a lot of people over here, and they've always been very satisfied, so I really appreciate it. And you guys you've definitely overcome some things I thought we were toast. There was nothing that could be done. But I was just going to say that sometimes people don't realize that there's a big difference in different criminal defense attorneys as far as whether they're familiar with the issues that immigrants face. So, when you're choosing a criminal defense attorney, that person doesn't have to be an expert in immigration law, but they have to know that it's an issue and consult with somebody who can advise them. The problem I see a lot is if the defense attorney doesn't realize what a big difference is or how the systems are so different, and they just don't, and they say, oh, this will be fine, then the immigrant might plead to something that is just the worst possible case. And you have to be thinking about that up front. It's a lot harder to undo once the damage is done.
Yeah, which we talk about undoing damage once it's done. It's called post-conviction relief. It's almost impossible.
Yes.
So please, one of the things too, there are attorneys in town that do both criminal and immigration. And me personally, the law is so complex, and both criminal and immigration and almost any other area of law is just increasingly complex. Apparently, lawyers have nothing else to do besides make things more complicated. I think it is vitally important that you hire an attorney who, Indiana attorneys can never say they specialize. We're ethically prohibited. So I would say, please hire an attorney that's made it their focus in a particular area. Mark Lopez Law Firm has made it their business to be amazingly well in criminal defense. Whether it's DUI, possession of narcotics, this law firm is on their way to get training and experience to defend against those type of crimes. And when people are facing immigration issues, the very first thing we do is tell them, you gotta hire Claire because she's amazing in immigration law.
Immigration lawyer, but
Yeah.
basically, yeah.
So, if you need to have surgery on your heart and on your lungs, you wouldn't just hire a general surgeon to do both of those. Those are very complicated organs. And
And you
I
want to
think-
keep both.
yeah, I just really can't stress enough, make sure you have the best team available for you. And anything else you want to add?
I think that's about says it. It's about everything.
Our numbers have appeared both multiple times behind us. If you have any questions about criminal law, give me a call, Attorney Mark Lopez, 317-632-3642. And if you have any questions about immigration law, I encourage you to contact my very good friend, Attorney Claire Corrado. What is your phone number? Remind us.
317-247-5040.
Thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
You have a great day.